Good afternoon and welcome to our Wellness Wise webinar series, Influencing Behaviour Change, Enhancing Health and Wellness Through Workplace Design. My name is Katrina Walton and I'm founder and director of Wellness Designs, a boutique workplace wellness consultancy business. And we support Australian organisations to create healthy, safe and high-performing workplaces. It's great to see such a diversity of attendees joining us again for today's webinar, once more across a range of industries from the likes of Australia, New Zealand and also Singapore. And it's also our biggest turnout so far for the Wellness Wise series, so obviously a topic that people are passionate about and also curious to learn more about. The reality is we spend a third of our life at work, and the nature of our work and where we work has a huge impact on the health and wellness of our employees, particularly in a changing world of work, and it's never been more the case. And when we're facilitating our nationally accredited Wellness Wise practitioner training program, which is aligned to the World Health Organization approach for healthy workplaces, we talk about the importance of an integrated approach to health, safety and wellness management within the workplace. So one that doesn't just focus on individuals, such as the likes of health checks or the latest fitness app, but also gives consideration to the policy, culture and environmental context as well. And when it comes to the environment, it's about how do we make those healthy choices the easy choices for our employees. So it's not just simply an opt-in when it comes to well-being in the workplace. Which really begs the question for today's webinar: is the design of your workplace nurturing or undermining the health and wellness of your employees? And how do you create a space in which both your organisation and your employees will flourish? So firstly, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into today's webinar. If you haven't already, just a chance to check your audio settings, and you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions through or at the end of the webinar. We'll be fielding those, and you'll see a chat box as well. If you need to speak with us throughout the session, you've got a chance to jot us a note there. For those that are on Twitter, our hashtag for today is #WellnessWise, and at the end of the webinar we'll also be sending out a link to a brief evaluation survey. We'd love you just to take a minute to let us know how you found today's session, and also to let us know what other hot topics you would be interested in as well. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Melissa Marsden, who is the guest facilitator for today's webinar. Melissa is the Chief Creative and Director of Marsden Collective. She has a unique blend of left and right brains, a talented interior designer with almost 20 years of high-profile projects under her belt. The Marsden Collective team meld the scientific and the philosophical, concocting strategic insights, data-driven decisions, and thoughtful design to create engaging workspaces and experiences. Melissa educates her clients on the opportunities of instilling the organisational values into the physical workplace, creating a healthy environment that not only benefits employees but also the business. So a warm welcome to Melissa.
Hi Katrina, and hi everyone, and thanks for having me today. We're going to be speaking about influencing behaviour change and how we can start to enhance our health and wellness through workplace design. So as Katrina introduced, I am a workplace strategist, and what that means is that we start to look at the organisation and understand the organisational goals to create an environment that starts to suit the space that we occupy, and see how we can start to influence the behaviours that we want to see in our workplace environment. Good, great. So when we start to look at how this all starts to come together, if you knew the decisions that you were making for your business could actually constrain its future potential, would you do it? Now, surprisingly, what we see in businesses is that leaders are making these decisions unknowingly every day. This decision is actually impacting on two of your most expensive business assets: property, but most importantly, your people. So when business leaders define their corporate strategy, often the last people that they would think to consult to help them with the execution of this is their workplace designers. And fair call. Traditionally, the role of a designer has been to put this many boxes into the bigger box. But what we're starting to see is a new type of design evolving, one that takes a far more holistic approach to creating a workplace that embodies your organisation's strategic plan. and infuses every element of the physical environment within it. We're looking to create a space that influences and guides the specific behaviours that we think are needed to execute that vision. So with a strategic design approach, what we start to look at is all the elements that make up your business and what makes it unique. So at a high level, these things are your vision, your purpose, and your culture. But at a deeper level, what that also means is that we're starting to look at the departments, the people, the communication processes, the work type and style, the rituals and policies, procedures, the little cultural nuances, and the story of your business evolution and how your vision for the future is going to come together. And what we start to see is that all of these elements are coming together to culminate in an overview of your health and well-being. So many people feel that an office is an office, and once you've designed one, they all look the same. But I can tell you that in over my 20 years experience, no two offices have been the same, just as no two businesses are the same. This office is your opportunity to speak to your employees, your clients, your suppliers, your competitors, everyone that you want to communicate with. This is your opportunity to show them what you stand for. So many offices obviously have an element of repetition, but the way that these elements come together is what makes your business unique. The ratios, the sizes and styles, they're all very distinctly different from one to another, creating a really unique dynamic. Many organisational changes can actually be addressed by changing the environment and the provision of physical cues as to how people are to behave in that environment. There are really a lot of underlying factors that begin to bleed into organisations over time. There's people, there's personalities, there's changes in work styles, there's the influence of technology, there's the type and location of clients, and the demands that are required to service all of these clients. So all of these elements begin to sculpt a culture that may be negatively impacting on the hopes and dreams of where we actually want to be as a business. So when we start to look at the design and making it a holistic, it's really a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle that's influenced by the factors of culture and purpose and vision. But understanding these factors actually enables us to build a complete picture of what we want to see and how those spaces are needed to be able to support the behaviours we want to see and see how that business can actually begin to flourish. So if we start to look at the way that work has changed, the nature of it has actually changed. So no longer are we a manual labour workforce, but our ability to do our job has actually now been supplemented by machines and technology. The garbage collector is a prime example of this. If you start to look at how we used to do it, it was manual labour, it was lifting and tipping into the back of the truck, whereas now we sit in a cab all day long and we have a mechanical arm that picks up the bin and tips it into the back of our truck. In the 1900s, we were in the Industrial Revolution and we were working laboriously in factories. And then in the 1960s, we started to see a significant shift to when we started to see the office landscape, the rows and rows of little cubicles where we all sat down in front of our computer screens. So no longer are we a labour workforce, but we're a knowledge workforce. And that information and knowledge is being driven by technology. A fantastic example of this is the Pope's inauguration. So the top picture is in 2005, and you can see that there is only one person with a flip phone in the bottom right-hand corner. Fast forward 8 years and look at the number of phones and laptop and iPads that people are utilising. That just gives you a really quick demonstration of how quickly technology is evolving. The impact of technology is having on our lives is quite significant. We're born with technology in our hands, we're constantly contactable, and we can work anywhere, anyhow. So what does this actually mean in terms of what it's doing for our lives? So the amount of information that we're being exposed to, it's getting faster. So our business is getting faster, we can travel faster, our data is getting faster. The information that we've got, we're being bombarded with emails and newsletters and internet and social media. Our businesses are now global. We've got geographic coverage has expanded. We've got a global economy and we've got flight at much more affordable rates. So this means that there's just more and more and more. We're always on, we're always connected, we're sitting for extended periods, we're working longer and we're working harder. So what does that all mean in terms of how we're going to focus? We've got all this technology in our busy lives and everything's happening. How do we find time to focus and to concentrate on what's actually important? Now, we've all heard that sitting is the new smoking, and some of you might be familiar with David Dunstan's work from Baker EDI. The impact that prolonged sitting is actually having on our health. It has changes in our metabolic rate, it increases our glucose levels, and it increases our risks of diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and colon cancer. And what the Victorian Health Department found was that they did a report and they found the cost of sedentary lifestyle is having on our Australian people. So 5 million people are thought to be overweight. 1.3 million of these people are considered to be obese. And this is resulting in 4 million days of lost productivity, which is costing Australian businesses $3.6 billion every year. So these statistics are really significant, and they're having significant financial cost that the poor health is having on our businesses. So it makes good business sense to start to contribute to the wellness of our employees. So not to mention the fact that we are working longer hours, but we're also spending more time at work than we do anywhere else in a day. So as a person that starts to shape and create these environments for people, we start to feel that we have a responsibility here. We need to start thinking about how we can create activity, movement, incidental exercise in the environments that we're creating for people. And it's about encouraging our employees to get up and move around the office during the day. But what we're also starting to see is that work isn't just around our physical movement, but it's also around our physical connections. So as technology only further influences the world that we're living in, it's also transformed the way that we work. We don't need to physically attend work anymore to actually be working. Remote working is rapidly becoming the norm. We're working from home, we're working from a client's office, we're on the bus, the train, and a cafe. In turn, our reasons for actually going to work have changed. We go to work to connect with our colleagues on a social level, to connect with our organisation and to our culture, to immerse ourselves in an atmosphere of what we're all about and remind ourselves of what it is that we do and why we do it. We're looking to connect, to share information, ideas and stories, to find support and answers to questions that we're struggling with. Just as we need to physically connect with our workplace has changed, the design of our workplace needs to change to support that. So the traditional kit of parts comprising of meeting rooms, workstations and offices, which you'll typically find in most traditional offices, are no longer enough to start to support the needs to facilitate meaningful social interactions that we're going into these offices to find. So we need spaces to collaborate, to connect and to communicate, but we also need spaces that are going to help us relax, recharge and work. So our needs have changed and so must our work environments. But they're not merely an attempt to create a furniture showroom. They need to be responsive and specific to the particular style of collaboration, communication and connection that is required in your organisation. They need to be adequately balanced. There needs to be a consideration for social versus individual workstations, noisy versus quiet spaces, and this ratio is different for every organisation and needs to be considered by a number of factors that tie back to the fact that what is the behaviour that you want to see in your organisation. So well considered and planned workspace can actually create a culture that's responsive to a company's strategic vision, and it can drive direct and tangible outcomes in how your people behave within your business and how in turn their health and well-being is being supported. So some of the ways that we start to consider this, and these are all elements that sit around design, is neuroscience. Now, neuroscience is obviously a science and it sounds like something that should be completely disconnected from what we do as designers, but I'm completely fascinated by neuroscience. And specifically neurogenesis. So neurogenesis is the creation of new dendrites and neurons, which can form new neural nets and packages of information called chunks. So in short, it's about building new brain. Now, there's a Dr. Fiona Kerr, who I had the good fortune of meeting at 2 conferences now, and I've been following her work ever since. And what she started to see was as charismatic managers and their staff grow the same maps of neural information, and it creates an internal match view of ideas and aims. So what this means is that when they did some brain studies, they actually found that good managers, charismatic managers, have the same neural nets as their employees. So effectively, when we hear that old saying, we're on the same page, they literally were. Their neural nets were mimicking each other. So what she started to do is she started to conduct a PhD on what makes people better leaders. And what she found is that in these charismatic managers, that they were building rich metacognitive skills in those that they're leading. They have a shared trust, purpose, and infrastructure, and it allows people to discover, learn, and lead together. So by having a shared purpose, it was allowing them to be able to create new roadmaps and creative paths. So what I started to see was that this was actually starting to support things that we had been doing just intuitively as designers for some time. And now there was actually scientific data that supported this evidence. So another fact that she started to find was that every time we have a face-to-face interaction, we're creating a new bit of brain. And this is happening through retinal eye lock. So this can't happen over Skype, but it has to happen in a physical connection. However, once it has actually been established, and I have had that retinal eye lock with you face-to-face, there's a chemical reaction that happens in my brain. And when I now need to make that connection with you again, my brain remembers it. So then I can actually conduct that conversation with you over Skype, and my chemical reactions will be the same as if I was having that meeting with you in person. But this all has to have been established face-to-face initially. What she also found with neurogenesis is that when you're physically moving, you're actually creating new brain. So physical activity makes you smarter. It helps to establish trust, empathy, and humour, and all of these things are fantastic in building a really great workplace culture. It lowers our resistance to new ideas, so we start to become more open, we're going to be more creative, we're going to be more exploratory, we're absorbing more information, we've got more nimble responses, so we're a bit quicker, and it has high levels of creativity and innovation. So what we're also starting to see is there's a perceived fairness that opens up people's behaviours. So in short, by actually creating physical movement in the workplace, we're actually making us more adaptable and open to different things. Have you ever wondered why you start to have really crazy brainwaves in the shower? Well, there's a really good reason for it. Again, it's around neurogenesis, but it's around the fact that daydreaming allows us to create abstract thoughts and to build different patterns and make new connections. So what happens when we're daydreaming is we're allowing our mind to wander. And those connections that your brain starts to make in those moments are connecting different neurons together that normally wouldn't have been connected. So when we're under pressure, we follow the same brain maps and the same brain pathways. But when we allow ourselves the opportunity to wander, we start to connect differently, and then those new brainwaves are created. In effect, we start to become more innovative. So how can we start to create these spaces to encourage these types of different activities in our workplaces? What we started to look at is we categorised the way that we design our workplaces into 5 really clear elements. So we have quiet spaces where you can concentrate, you can work alone, or you can work among others. We've got collaborative spaces where you can brainstorm, you can create, and you can work with others. We've got standing spaces so you can stand and you can work. We've also got lounging spaces so you can relax, you can read, and you can work informally with others. And we've got bump spaces so that you can interact with other employees. And what we start to see is that space facilitates or inhibits varying needs for communication, information sharing and collaboration, interaction or privacy and quiet reflection. So we can actually really start to influence the way that our people are behaving by the types of spaces that we are now providing. And when we start to look at how behaviours are happening in our workplaces, we can start to see that influencing behaviour is almost all of what management is about, and buildings influence behaviour. So by actually creating a hybrid infrastructure within our organisation, what we can start to see is how we can actually encourage people to pay attention to the proximity of people and spaces to each other. So when we start to design the style of spaces in our soft environments and our technological tools, what we can start to see is how we actually facilitate those close to each other and where we need to be putting things further apart. So the building and the layout of the physical environment has a significant impact on how we can actually influence these behaviours. And that's just one major element that's having a bearing on the process of innovation and creativity. Great. And we're just, from the poll, we've seen that there's 69% of you are saying that you actually have these spaces in your workplace. However, 26% don't. So it's good to see that there's a large volume of organisations that are actually starting to implement these types of spaces, but there's a little bit of work to get done in some others. So if we start to think about our preferred way of thinking, there's the whole diversity of thinking bias. Now, some of you might be familiar with this, but there's actually 6 categories of thinking that we all naturally gravitate towards, in terms of the fact that we will naturally gravitate towards people with like-minded thinking. So that's the people that are going to agree with you. And the reason we do that is because it's comfortable. They don't challenge our view of the world, and they don't, or how we interpret the cues around you. So what we've found is that 75% of leaders are options and outcomes focused, but only 3% look or care about evidence and risk. So what happens is, if we start to enable ourselves to sit with the same people and communicate with the same people on a day-to-day basis, our view of the world is very much narrowed by the fact that we continue to interact with people who have the same sorts of opinions as us. A really famous example of this is with Barack Obama. So he would make sure that he would go around the room and ask everyone's opinion before making a decision. What he was doing this was seeking out diverse opinions to ensure that all aspects of a problem and task were considered, so that he wasn't just using his own knowledge and his own way of thinking or consulting his direct trusted advisors, because they may actually be biased in terms of their opinion. So by creating these workplaces that enable people to come together and connect in an informal way that normally wouldn't connect, you're actually broadening your way of thinking, because you're going to be interacting with people who potentially have a different view of the world than what you do. And this is called serendipity. And that's something that designers are starting to play more and more to. Another way that we can start to influence behaviour change is by the way that we actually conduct the workplace design. So when I attended a conference recently, they had built their kitchen as the first point of arrival to their office. Similar to this image you can sort of see here. And what did they want to do about this? They had actually engaged with their employees and found that they all felt most comfortable at home in their kitchen. And they felt that that was an environment that allowed them to behave like their authentic selves. So that's why they brought this one into their organisation. So they would actually stand in the kitchen and have their meeting kickoffs, and it allowed staff to be comfortable enough to bring their outside selves to work. And what the outcome of this was, it was in 3 months, they were creating a different standard of work, because they were starting to look at things differently. Their clients began to see them as problem solvers, not just as a design firm. And they had earned their clients' trust and become part of the family, and they'd formed partnerships. Clients would come and hang out in their kitchens before and after meetings, interacting with other clients, to the point where this company actually even formalised it, scheduling meeting overlaps so that clients who wanted to meet each other could. So what this demonstrated is that by changing the signposts of how your organisation can operate, people were allowed to start to behave differently. The junior staff started to become stronger and were more confident in voicing their opinions, which started to break down the human hierarchies. And this started to really change the face of how these SMEs were interacting. They were bringing their authentic selves to work, they were thinking differently, and they were engaging with their clients differently. Another important piece of research was that back in 1970, Thomas Allen created the Allen curve. And essentially what this is it showed that the closer that we sit to someone, the more that we'll interact with them. So on the chart there, you can see the number of face-to-face interactions versus the number of emails that start to happen. And then how they disintegrate as you move further and further away from people. So what the study found was that at 50 metres, our weekly communication between people will drop to 0. But if you want to have fewer emails from your colleagues, you need to move your chair at least 7 metres closer. So the closer that we sit to people, the more interaction we'll have with them, and that's over technology or face-to-face. Now, this was done in 1970. This same study was repeated again in 2006 with the same outcome. The only technology they had started to see at that particular time that was starting to break the Allen curve was Yammer. And today I would suspect that Slack and other similar types of technologies are starting to support that. So Yahoo is notorious for revoking mobile work privileges because their chief of human resources explained that some of the best decisions and insights come from hallway and cafeteria discussions. So what they were doing by bringing their people back into the workplace was creating these opportunities for people to communicate because of proximity. They were getting better outcomes because people were having to bump into each other. And they realised that the best designs aren't going to come up with them when they're sitting in front of their monitor. So if we need to take a holistic perspective on how we actually see this work, let's have a look at a working environment to see how we've actually included some of these spaces and what we can do to actually incorporate them into your workplace. So this case study is for an enterprise class data solutions provider. And this client wished to future-proof their organisation and improve the health and wellbeing of their employees. So some of these reactions of the office, they saw this as an opportunity to invest in their employees and an opportunity to maximise the productivity. So some of the examples that we've got here are, we've got a quiet room. So these are small enclosed rooms where either one person or two people can meet and work privately. That's a fairly example of a very stock standard option. They have many other options where you can have large graphics, you can have yoga mats, you can have lounges, quite a variety of types of spaces in these. Collaborative spaces, so you can see here we've got a standing bench, we've got whiteboards, we've got TVs, and then we've also got soft spaces where people can communicate in a smaller group in a lounge style environment. Very informal. Then we've got our standing spaces, so we've got sit-to-stand workstations have been employed in this workspace through for all work points. And then we've got our lounging spaces, and there's a variety of those here. So we've got our soft spaces where you can sit and have coffee and have a chat with a colleague. And then we've got a bit more formal where you can sit at a banquette seat and you can have, you can do some more work independently, but in a little bit more of a relaxed environment away from your desk. And then we've got our bump spaces. So spaces that are going to bring people together from the organisation in incidental meetings and create informal communication with people that you may not otherwise have actually communicated with. Now, we went back and did some surveys on these employees to find out how they were actually feeling about the workplace. And what we found that 35% of the people felt that they were healthier in the new environment. 65% of them rated their workstation functionality as greatly contributing to this. And 96% of people rated the height adjustability of their workstation as functional to extremely functional. They also rated their chair from comfortable to extremely comfortable at 67%. So the quality of the fittings and fixtures that you're using in your work environment have a significant impact on how your employees are engaging with it. We also started to look at how people were utilising the standing function of their workstations. There's often a lot of chat saying that people won't use them. Should we actually use them? So what we asked them was, how often do you actually adjust your workstation? And you can see there that 58% of people adjusted their workstation 1 to 2 times a day. And when we asked them how long they were standing for, people were varying all the way from 15-30 minutes per day all the way through all day, and in fact that they never adjusted their workstation. But the average time that people were standing was between 30 minutes and 2 hours. When we started to look at how this is actually starting to affect their emotional wellbeing, we looked at the different elements and we found that 42% no longer had any afternoon lethargy, 47% had less backache, 56% were less tired, 56% had improved concentration, 67% were feeling healthier. But the big one for me was that 95% of staff felt that being able to stand at their desk had improved their physical wellbeing. And if we think about that, how is that going to actually translate into their emotional wellbeing? And when we started to look into that, we found that 50% of people felt that their relationships had improved with regards to the way that the new office had been designed. 63% of people felt that they were more collaborative. 68% had more job satisfaction. 87% of people were happy to extremely happy. And 58% of staff felt they were more productive in their new work environment. So these are all fantastic direct results that this client has achieved through the design of their workplace environment. That's just one example. This one here as well, this is for Plantation Homes. They were able to reduce their sick leave by 45%. They had a 60% reduction in staff turnover, and they had a 25% reduction in their energy costs. These are all direct ROIs for their business. So when we start to look at how this can actually be managed and measured, there's now the WELL certification available. So the WELL certification looks at air, water, light, nourishment, fitness, comfort, and the mind. And you're assessed against each of these categories to determine whether or not you're falling into an awarded level. So Mirvac has been the first to be awarded the Gold WELL certification in March of last year for their 200 George Street, Sydney premises, and you can see an image of it there. The key features that they report to have significantly contributed to them achieving the gold standard is that 75% of their workstations are located within 7.5 metres of a window, meaning that every employee has access to direct natural light. They have pre-programmed lights that adjust the brightness to maintain your natural circadian rhythm. They have dedicated health and wellness education seminar series, and they have Pilates and yoga classes held weekly. Another interesting point to note too is that their cafe, the Song Kitchen, is a profit-for-purpose enterprise that through their partnership with the YMCA ensures that all their profits go towards domestic violence programs that support women and children. So when they're starting to look at the certification, it's very holistic. It's not just about the physical well-being, but it's also about the mental and emotional well-being of not only themselves, but also in their community. So it goes much broader than just the individual organisation. So that's a whole lot of information, and we can start to think now, okay, well that's great, but I can't afford a complete refurb. So what are we going to do to try and implement some of these things into our organisation today? So I come up with a couple of quick wins for you to try and start to think about how we could actually go back to our offices and incorporate these. So if we start to look at quiet spaces, what we often see is that we're converting old storage rooms or offices into a shared room where people can relax, they can retreat, and they can have a phone call. What we often find is that with that traditional mix of meeting room and office and workstation, is that employees don't actually have a private space that they can go to and they can retreat to. So sometimes someone's willing to give up their office and share it with the people. Otherwise, old storage rooms make a fantastic option. Collaboration spaces. Simple one, paint a blank wall with some whiteboard paint. Add some loose casual furniture for informal meetings, and you've got one of those hallway options where you saw that you can start to come together and collaborate in a really informal and quick setting and disband really quickly. Standing. Stand-up meetings, we can have sit-to-stand desks with the add-ons. So now we've got Very desks and other options that can actually be retrofitted onto your existing desk, but also having stand-up tables with no chairs, so you don't give people the option of actually sitting down. Lounging spaces are a big one. So just soft spaces for an alternative work setting or a team meeting. So that could be as easy as putting a couch in the corner or finding some other spaces where you can shuffle things around to incorporate some soft furnishings and allow people to just go back and relax. And think about your bump spaces. Providing communal seating close to tea points encourages that informal interaction. And that's actually a really good way of connecting the collaboration spaces with the bump spaces. By putting those sorts of bits and pieces together, you'll start to see that happen. Other things that we start to think about is, think about what is important to your organisation. What do you value? And if we start to think about that, if one of your values is to have fun, do we have colour? Do we have games? Are there other ways that we're starting to transmit those behaviours into our organisation? If your value is to be transparent and open and inclusive, how are you creating that visual connection? Is there glass between offices? Do we need to look at removing some walls? And how do we start to connect spaces together to actually bring people together? So we need to start thinking about what are the values that we want to be living, and what does that behaviour look like if we're living that value? And how do we want people to actually feel about our organisations? So in summary, what we can start to see is that through design, we can start to influence people's behaviour. We can create environments that encourage and prioritisation of our health and well-being so that it's an easy choice for us to make. And this is where I think the future of workplace design is heading.
Great, thanks. And we're just going to throw it open to the audience. Just a bit of a poll. And this time we'll get you to place it in the quick chat box. What have you implemented in your workplace? So Mel has shared some great quick wins that hopefully some practicons we could take away back to our workplace. But what are others that you might have implemented? So we'd love to hear. Okay, so we've had stand-up desks, they seem to be common, quiet spaces, collaborative workspaces, meditation spaces. Jess has organised their lunchroom to include plants and couches, great. 2 kitchens from Ben, standing meeting rooms, a few stand-up desks there. The university has bump spaces, quiet spaces, lounging, hot desks, edible garden from Alison, and demonstration kitchen space, excellent. Fantastic. So a great range of and relatively low cost options there too, Mel. Quick wins. Mindfulness spaces, colouring in games from Vicky. Wonderful. Okay, and we'll move on. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the end. Oh, wow, what a lot of gems there from Melissa around how we can create a healthy workplace through design. Now, we're just going to open it up to questions now, and just while those are coming through, I've just got a few that I've made a note of throughout the session for Mel. Mel, you spoke about the role that design can play in fostering connected teams. You probably never get asked this question. What do you think of open plan offices?
Plan offices have had a lot of controversy around them, and in some cases for good reason. What I have tended to see with open plan offices is that there was a period of time where we went through a phase where we just kicked everyone out of their offices and we just put them all into workstations, and we never made any compensation for all of those previous sort of functionalities of what our private offices provided to us. And I think that's where we're starting to see a significant shift now, where you're starting to see quiet rooms being provided and all of those other, elements that we spoke about in terms of lounging spaces and, standing spaces and bump spaces, because, people would sit and eat at their desks and they were all shoved in together like battery hens in that photo that you saw from the 1960s. So personally, I believe that open plan workspaces can work, but they need to be considered around the particular objectives of the organisation and those ratios that we spoke about. So when we go in and start working with an organisation, we look at how they work and what kind of tasks they're actually doing. So for example, typically an accounting company, they're quite individual. They work privately and independently. They don't have a great need for a lot of collaboration spaces, but they have a big need for quiet spaces where they can go and concentrate, or they can have private phone calls or webinars with their clients. On the other hand, software engineers need to be very creative and very innovative, and so they need a lot of collaboration spaces. So it's just a matter of looking at the organisation and understanding what's going to support those guys in actually doing their job better, and then designing accordingly. So it's really not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Fantastic, thanks Mel. And we've just had a question. Turn on myself. Sorry, Matt. And we just had a question come through from Lauren. What are your tips for activity-based working and hot desking?
So activity-based working and hot desking, so they are 2 very big fads that we're seeing in our workplace design at the moment. And it's for different reasons. So activity-based working, whilst it's given a blanket label, it should actually be designed specifically to the organisation. So we've worked with clients where we've actually gone down the path of what we would rather describe as more agile working, and it comes together as a culmination of how that organisation needs to work again. So perhaps not every department actually goes down a full agile route, but it should actually be considered around how that organisation needs to function, and then providing that support again to ensure that you're getting the right balance of spaces and that they're the right sizes and that you're actually facilitating all of those needs. Hot desking in itself is another factor, but it's making sure that you're providing all the provisions. So have we got adequate lockers? Have we got the adequate spaces? And it's about thinking about the functionality of each of those spaces. So if I'm coming into work today and I need to get a report written, I need to be able to go and find a quiet space for myself to be able to work in. But if I need to come in and need to brainstorm some activities with my clients and my colleagues, then I need to go and find a much more active space. And that's where we start to think about how do we actually design spaces that support the activities that we need to be seeing in our environments.
Fantastic, Melissa. And a related question through from Fiona: how do you educate people to use the open plan and activity-based spaces? We have a lot of people fearful of the change.
That's a very common one. And look, we're all very scared of change, and it's about engaging with our employees early. So when we start to work with our clients, before we even start designing, we start to look at what the appetite for change is going to be. So we start to engage with employees through surveys and start to understand how they actually feel about their workplace. What is it in the job that they deem to do? How much time do they actually feel that they're sitting at their workstation or at their desk, or they spend in the office? And then what we actually do is start to collate physical data that can then support that discussion. So often we'll go into an organisation and we'll ask people, how long do you sit at your desk for? Or how long do you spend in the office? And they go, oh, I'm sitting here for 80-90% of the day. Yet when we go in and we do an observational study to actually look at that utilisation, the reality is more like 45 to 50%. And it's having that data then to be able to have an informed and constructive conversation with people around what their true behaviours are, that we can start to see that change happen. What we also do is we bring them on the process. So by having regular, we call them lunchbox lectures, we're giving people an opportunity to see how the design is developing, to ask questions, to raise any concerns. And by actually engaging them in that process as we move forward, what we've started to see is that they'll start to bring problems, but they also start to bring solutions. And sometimes it's things that we've never actually heard of or we hadn't actually considered. And sometimes what we start to see with that is that there's becomes a mindset change. So you need to think about how we can actually create change leadership from within the organisation by looking at who our early adopters are and working with them to then help to bring the rest of the organisation along on that journey. But it really is about education, it's about engagement and making sure that everyone is comfortable and at least is having their opinion voiced and heard and then responded to.
Some great questions coming through. Melissa, another one from Frith. On what level do individual ergonomics come into the 5 elements that you mentioned?
That's another common question that we start to hear. And what we start to see with that one as well is there is a lot more furniture on the market available now that actually starts to look at the ergonomic design that is required for different individuals. When we come down to a very specific ergonomic issue with a particular individual, that does make it a little bit more tricky. So if you've had a back injury or something like that and you do need a specific chair, that's when we do start to see those particular requirements become more significant. But for the generalist population of an office, the ergonomic considerations are holistic across the business and suit a majority of people.
Fantastic. And one last question from Nick. Melissa there, how much of your work is beyond the actual workspace and into end-of-trip facilities such as bike storage, showers, to aid in active and alternative transport, which also has a strong effect on staff mental and physical health?
That's a really good question, Nick. So we have started to see a fair bit of our work transition into that space, and where we haven't been directly involved in actually designing those end-of-trip facilities, they are becoming a far more important factor in our clients actually selecting the particular building that they're going to relocate to. So that actually comes up as a leasing factor for us very early on. So when we actually start working with our clients and we talk about, you know, what would you like to see in your new workplace and how do you think that we can actually facilitate these things, those particular requirements are coming up very strongly. So employees are asking for an opportunity to have a shower, to be able to, to have somewhere to leave their belongings, to be able to do physical exercise before and after work and be able to provide that option for them. So when we actually start to write our strategic briefs for our clients and then take to market to source their properties, that is a very strong consideration in their decision-making process, and we're starting to see a lot more buildings implementing these strategies.
Great, Melissa. And one last question from Frith. When you're presenting the survey data, Frith asked, how did you rate health, Melissa, there? How was that determined?
So those surveys were sent out to the employees of the organisation, and the definition of health was not defined, and it was their own perspective on how they felt their health was being affected by the workplace.
Great, thanks Melissa. And that brings us to the end of our formal questions. And I know those that have particularly enjoyed today's session, Melissa, you're just keen to let us know about an upcoming event that you'll be running at Marsden Collective.
Yes, that's right. So we'll be holding a breakfast seminar on Tuesday, the 10th of July, in relation to creating connected community. So it's a little bit of a take on what we've talked about today, but in the fact that, you know, our work environments are considerably changing, and how does that start to affect us in terms of creating a connection between not only ourselves, but our peers and also our companies? How do we continue to maintain those connections? So we've got 4 speakers, myself included. Katrina's also going to be speaking on health and wellness, but we've also introduced, we've got Belinda Brosnan from HR Junction, and she's going to be talking about effective personal leadership and how you can be an effective leader in leading people around you. And we've also got Nadia Taylor from Livingston's, who is going to bring around discussion around social structures and the creation of caring and how we can actually better care for each other in our work environments to really strengthen these communities. So that's happening at the Grove at 480 Queen Street at 7 a.m. on the 10th of July. If you'd like to come along, I'm sure Katrina will be sharing the link, but you can also jump onto our website and find that under the events and thoughts section.
Great, thanks Melissa. And there'll also be a link. We'll be sending out our evaluation survey, as I mentioned at the start of the web, but we'll include a link to that event for your easy access. And I should point out too, Melissa, places are limited with that one, aren't they? So it's certainly getting quick. Fantastic. So, and speaking of professional development opportunities too, just as far as a wrap up for the webinar, just to remind you, if you are looking to further build the capacity within your workplaces to develop an employee wellness strategy that works, we have a series of training sessions available at a leadership level. Our nationally accredited practitioner training, which is an initial 2-day course, followed by a 12-month support program, which is delivered in partnership with our RTO partner, and also our Wellness Wise Champions training, which is really designed for those at a site or department level to really nurture wellness and build that wellness culture locally. So I encourage you to stop by our website. And also just, again, a bit of an advertorial, just our upcoming dates. We'll again be doing a national roadshow. We'll be heading to Adelaide later this month, and then doing a whip around Sydney, Brisbane, Hobart and Melbourne, and also doing our first course in New Zealand this week. So again, looking to spread and build that capability across Australia and New Zealand. Also just wanted to firstly thank Melissa, certainly some real gems, and I'm sure you've walked away with a lot of practical takeaways on how to, and also some quick wins on how to foster a healthy workplace environment back in your workplaces, one that's going to bring out the best both in your organisation and its employees. I'd also just like to make mention of our next webinar, which will be on Tuesday the 7th of August with the wonderful Adam Houlihan on how to leverage LinkedIn as a health and wellness professional. So Adam is an author. He's written a number of books in this space on social media, including the LinkedIn Playbook. He's also CEO of Web Traffic That Works, so no doubt that will be another popular session. So thank you very much for your time today. We look forward to hearing your feedback. We'll send that evaluation survey out to you later today, so please take a minute. We'd love to hear your thoughts and also what you would like to see featured in our next series. So thank you again and have a great day.